It began in silence. Not the peaceful silence of an early morning, but the heavy, unnatural silence of an absence. On the morning of Tuesday, November 12th, Mrs. Martha, the housekeeper who had served the Finch family for over 20 years, was the first to feel it. She was accustomed to the rhythm of the house. She knew that at precisely 7 o'clock, Arthur Finch would leave his study for breakfast, Earl Grey tea and the Wall Street Journal. But today, 7 o'clock passed, and then 7:30. The mahogany door to the study remained shut. Mrs. Martha knocked, gently at first, then with more force. There was no reply. A cold sense of unease crept over her. She called for Eleanor Finch, who was still in the master bedroom. Eleanor, her face still veiled with sleep, but unnervingly perfect, used the master key. The key turned in the lock, but the door wouldn't budge. It was bolted from the inside. Real panic began to seep through her calm facade. Minutes later, the building's security team was summoned. They forced the door. The room inside was immaculate. Arthur Finch was not there. The New York Police Department descended with their customary professionalism. Lead Detective David Miller, a middle-aged man with tired eyes that had seen too much of the city's darkness, took charge. He walked the perimeter of the study, his seasoned mind cataloging every detail. The room was a fortress. The door was bolted from within. The reinforced glass window looked out onto a small balcony, and from there, a sheer 30-meter drop to the stone path below. No signs of forced entry, no ropes, nothing. Inside, a glass of Macallan 25 sat half full on the desk. Finch's expensive leather chair was empty, facing a marble fireplace. "Check the fireplace," Miller ordered a forensics tech. The tech knelt. "Clean, sir. No ash, no burnt scraps of paper. It's like someone vacuumed it out." Miller frowned. A man who was disappearing wouldn't stop to clean the fireplace. His eyes scanned the room, and then, like a wrong note in a perfect symphony, his gaze froze. On the deep red Persian rug, almost invisible, was a tiny, dark object. A younger officer had missed it. Miller carefully picked it up with a pair of tweezers. "Looks like," the forensics tech said, squinting, "a burnt coffee bean." For the next 3 days, Detective Miller and his team worked tirelessly. They questioned Eleanor Finch, who, with tear-filled eyes, spoke of a minor disagreement the night before. They questioned Marcus Thorne, the loyal vice president, whose plane tickets and hotel receipts proved he was in Chicago. They tried to speak with Julian Finch, the rebellious son, who merely shrugged and said he was glad his father was gone. But there was no evidence, no ransom note, no signs of a struggle. The Arthur Finch case became a classic locked room mystery, a frustrating puzzle that stumped the best minds of the NYPD. To the public, it was a sensational disappearance. To the police, it began to smell like a well-planned escape. The case went cold, sinking into the city's vast file of unsolved stories. And that's when Jack Corrigan came in. Jack Corrigan wasn't sought out by Eleanor Finch because of a reputation and glossy magazines. He was found through whispers among lawyers and the wealthy, a fixer, a ghost who could walk where the police couldn't or wouldn't. His office in Hell's Kitchen was an insult to the wealth of the clients he served. It was cluttered, smelled of stale cigarette smoke, and was filled with stories of failure. When Arthur Finch called, Corrigan was watching the rain streak down his grimy window pane. He listened to her story, her cold, controlled voice a stark contrast to the chaos of his office. He refused. He hated cases like this. "The police believe he left on his own," Eleanor said, a crack of desperation finally showing in her voice. "They aren't looking anymore. But I know Arthur. He would never just leave. Something is wrong. I will pay you double your usual rate." Corrigan sighed. It wasn't just the money. It was the puzzle. A locked room, a coffee bean. It was the kind of challenge his restless mind craved. "Send me the address," he grumbled, and a new chapter of the case began. Corrigan arrived at the Finch residence on a gray afternoon. He didn't use the main entrance. He circled around to the service entry, observing the security cameras, the blind spots. He was reading the story of the house before he even stepped inside. Eleanor met him, still dressed in elegant funereal black. She led him to the study, still sealed with police tape. Corrigan examined everything with an almost hypnotic focus. He didn't just look, he observed. He noted the brand of whiskey, an ostentatious choice, more for show than for drinking. He checked the bookshelves, seeing that the tomes on philosophy and ancient history were coated in a fine layer of dust, while the books on corporate strategy were pristine. He knelt on the rug, right where Miller had found the coffee bean. Using a small penlight, he shined it parallel to the floor, and he saw what the forensics team had missed: a minuscule scratch in the glossy finish of the desk leg, as if a small metal object had been dragged across it. Then he began his interviews, not as a cop looking for a confession, but as an author searching for the truth in his characters' stories. His conversation with Eleanor took place in a sunroom overlooking a garden withered by autumn. "You said you had a minor disagreement," Corrigan began, his voice soft. "What do your minor disagreements usually entail, Mrs. Finch?" Eleanor tightened her grip on her teacup. "Trivial things. Vacation plans, the redecoration of the guest wing." Arthur was a man of routines. "Did his routines include changing his will?" Corrigan asked bluntly. Eleanor's composure fractured for a split second. A flash of anger in her eyes was extinguished as quickly as it appeared. "I don't know what you're talking about. Arthur's will was his own affair." Corrigan knew she was lying. He could feel it. The meeting with Marcus Thorne was at the Nexus Dynamics headquarters, a tower of glass and steel in Midtown. Thorne's office was on the top floor, looking down on the city like a god. "Arthur was my mentor, my best friend," Thorne said, leaning back in his $5,000 chair. He looked relaxed, but the incessant, light tapping of his fingers on the glass desk betrayed him. Corrigan didn't beat around the bush. "A best friend you were planning to overthrow, Mr. Thorne. I heard Arthur found some discrepancies in the books, some very lucrative contracts awarded to shell companies." Thorne's smile froze. "That is a baseless accusation. If you're going to accuse me, you'd better have proof." "Oh, I'm not accusing anyone," Corrigan said. "I'm just collecting pieces of the puzzle. Your flight to Chicago, did you travel with anyone?" "I was alone, business class, slept the whole way," Thorne snapped, his voice sharp as a razor. He had his answers ready. Too ready. Finally, Corrigan sought out Julian Finch in Brooklyn. His loft was a curated chaos of paint, canvas, and sculptures made of scrap metal. Julian, in torn jeans and a paint-splattered t-shirt, was welding a massive piece that looked like a shackled, decaying king. "Is that your father?" Corrigan asked, gesturing to the sculpture. Julian switched off the torch and smirked. "It could be any old tyrannical king. Pick your own." "You don't seem very broken up about his disappearance." "Broken up?" Julian let out a bark of laughter. "It's the best thing that's ever happened to me. For the first time in my life, I don't feel his shadow hanging over me. He wanted an heir, a carbon copy. He got an artist. It drove him insane. Hate is a powerful motive, kid. So is love, detective. Go ask my dear stepmother how strong her love for my father's money is." Corrigan left with a clear feeling. All three of them were telling a version of the truth, wrapped in a thick blanket of lies. And it all revolved around Arthur Finch, the man they both loved and hated. Back in his office, Corrigan stared at his corkboard. 3 suspects, 3 stories. But the coffee bean didn't belong in any of them. It was an anomaly. And in Corrigan's line of work, the anomaly was always where the truth began. He started the tedious work. He went to the forensics lab of an old friend who owed him a favor. "Geisha coffee from Kenya," his friend Leo said, peering through a microscope. "Italian roast. This stuff is rare as hen's teeth. Outrageously expensive for true connoisseurs." Corrigan spent a full day on the phone. He called specialty roasters, high-end importers. Most had never heard of it. Finally, he got lucky. A tired voice on the other end from a warehouse in Red Hook gave him the answer. The Daily Grind in Brooklyn were their exclusive supplier. They're the only weirdos in the city who order it. Corrigan's heart gave a single hard thump. Brooklyn. He drove to the small, cozy cafe. It was a world away from Arthur Finch's life. He showed the millionaire's picture to the barista. The girl, whose name was Maya, recognized him immediately. "Oh, that's Mr. Tuesday," she said. "Mr. Tuesday?" "Yeah, he only ever came in on Tuesday mornings, real early. Always sat at that corner table, read the paper, and didn't talk to anyone. Had a double espresso. Always looked so sad, like he had the weight of the world on his shoulders." Corrigan sat at the table. It gave him a perfect view of the door and the staircase leading to the apartment above. He felt he was getting close. While talking to Maya, he learned another detail. The last time he was here, Maya recalled, the morning he vanished, he seemed different, agitated. He spilled some coffee grounds on the floor by the counter when he was getting sugar. He brushed it off his shoe in a hurry, but I guess a bean could have gotten stuck. A coffee bean, stuck to a shoe, carried home, and dropped on a rug. A simple explanation. But why would a man secretly drink a coffee he publicly despised? Why go to a humble cafe when he could have anything he wanted? It wasn't a habit. It was a ritual, an escape. That night, Corrigan didn't sleep. He sat in his office, surrounded by notes and articles. He reread the financial analysis of Nexus Dynamics, a house of cards. And then it clicked. Arthur Finch wasn't running from a kidnapper. He was running from his own ruin. Corrigan began to connect the dots. Arthur knew his company was about to implode. He knew that when it did, the vultures would circle. Eleanor, who would lose her fortune. Marcus, who would face prison for fraud, Julian, who would revel in his father's downfall. They all had a reason to want him gone. So he made them suspects before they could make him a criminal. The disappearance was a defensive maneuver, a preemptive strike. He created a perfect crime scene, leaving clues that pointed at everyone. He calculated that the suspicion would destroy them, and when he miraculously returned, he would be the tragic victim, the survivor. Public sympathy would be his lifeline. Corrigan knew where Arthur Finch was, not on a tropical island or in a Swiss bank account. He was right here in New York, hiding in plain sight, in the one place he could be anonymous, the apartment above the daily grind. He didn't call the police. This was a chess match between him and Arthur, and it had to be finished privately. He went to the cafe at midnight. The street was deserted. He easily picked the lock on the back door and climbed the creaking stairs. The apartment door was unlocked. He pushed it open gently and stepped inside. Arthur Finch was sitting there, in a room with only the barest essentials: a bed, a table, and a chessboard. He was staring intently at the pieces, a man playing against himself. He looked 10 years older. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a profound weariness. "I believe," Corrigan said, his voice breaking the silence, "that white is in check."
Arthur looked up. There was no shock, only weary resignation. "I knew you'd figure it out eventually. I underestimated you, detective." "You underestimated everyone," Corrigan said. "You thought they were pawns in your game, but you forgot that pawns can also move forward." Corrigan sat across from him, the chessboard between them. He didn't accuse. He simply retold the story, piece by piece. The financial ruin, the staged disappearance, the coffee bean, an arrogant mistake. Arthur listened, not interrupting. When Corrigan finished, he let out a soft, bitter laugh. "A near-perfect plan, wasn't it? There's no such thing as a perfect plan, Arthur. There's always the human element. You can't stage emotions, and you can't hide the truth forever." "So what now?" Arthur asked. "You'll call the police? What will they charge me with? Wasting their time?" "No," Corrigan said, standing up. "I won't tell them you staged your disappearance. I'm going to give them something much better. I'm going to give them proof of your financial fraud at Nexus Dynamics. The documents, the transactions. I'm going to turn you from a mysterious victim into a nationally known criminal. Your legacy won't be a puzzle. It will be a disgrace." For the first time, Corrigan saw real fear in Arthur Finch's eyes. Not the fear of prison, but the fear of irrelevance and contempt. The fear that his story wouldn't be a legend, but a cautionary tale. The next day, Arthur Finch turned himself in. The story of his disappearance was quickly overshadowed by the colossal financial scandal of Nexus Dynamics. The fallout was swift and brutal. The company collapsed. Marcus Thorne was indicted and faced years in prison. Eleanor Finch, her fortune evaporated, quietly left New York. Julian Finch, free of both his father and his father's money, continued to create his art in Brooklyn, feeling free for the first time. Jack Corrigan received his check. He went back to his office, poured himself a drink, and watched the last of the rainfall. The case was closed, but its echo remained. It wasn't a story of good and evil. It was a story about people, about pride, desperation, and the choices they make when they are cornered. In this vast city, Corrigan thought, everyone is writing their own story. Most of them are sad ones. His job, quite simply, was to read between the lines.